Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick here, as always, with Chris Whittingham. Now that you have found us, make sure that you either follow or subscribe, depending on the app that you are using, whether it's Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, Podbean, Pocket Cast, any of the 50 apps that you can find us on at this point. Also, check out the other podcasts in our network. Got a couple of major debuts coming up in the next week. We've got the first full episode of Smark Your Territory, our wrestling pod, getting you ready for SummerSlam. That is going to be with Josh Chappelle and Bill O'Rourke. So check that out in the next couple of days. And also,
I believe I'm appearing on Smark Your Territory, by the way, as the uninformed, not in this episode, but in the next one, as the uninformed wrestling observer. I will be going to watch SummerSlam with Josh and Bill, and then I will be offering my wildly uninformed opinions.
Well, you kind of do that here on the Heat. So actually, that should be very easy for you to just transition. Actually, Jonathan Zaslow is supposed to make an appearance on Smark Your Territory. So that we asked him, which pod do you want to appear on? And he said Smark. So that's fine. He's going to be on there soon. Also, the debut coming up this week, and I want to give some clarity here to the name of this particular podcast because Giancarlo Navas completely screwed this up on Miami Heat Beat when he introduced it on their episode this week. It is not Mishes and Wishes or whatever it is that he called it. It is Swings and Mishes with Craig Mish and Jeremy Tash. That's going to be
Taché.
Yeah, he's got the little thing at the end of the E. So that's so that's what we go with.
You got to say it correctly, man.
All right. Also, obviously, check out our football podcast, Fish Tank, 3 yards per carry, Fantasy on 5. This is a big fantasy week, and 5 Rings Canes. All right, but we are going to feed the beast here, Chris. Had to pull some teeth to get this to happen today. We have not talked a lot of Miami Heat here on the podcast. This is, this is playing the hits, as they say, right? Like this is, when I put on in the car, Kids Bop radio for my daughter, and they play the same 6 songs all day long. Why don't you just meet me in the middle all day long, or Let It Go? I mean, that's what this is, Chris.
Yes, it is.
We're getting back to the Heat because we've noticed we've strayed a little bit lately, basically because they did absolutely freaking nothing this offseason. And
they have deserved this treatment, in my opinion.
Yes, in your opinion, absolutely. But something actually happened today, and this is how devoid of news it's been with the Heat this offseason.
Can I just say before you tell us what the news is that even so, like for example, yesterday was Heat Day on NBA TV, and they're running all these old games. I actually stayed up watching the Heat Spurs Game 6. Oh, always a delightful watch. But LeBron put this thing on Instagram about how he was watching Heat Day, and it was like captioned with the Heatles and all that. And if that happens a year ago, right? If Heat Day is a year ago, and LeBron is Instagramming about this, then immediately there's this giant freak out about, oh, maybe LeBron's going to come back. Maybe he'll come back. Holy crap, LeBron actually might be coming back to Miami. But because he signed a long-term deal, it kind of pokes a hole in it. And like even the false hope that used to exist that maybe there's potential for a whale out there for us in some capacity. Like even that had a pin put in that cushion this summer, and it's just like now we're kind of left without that even hope of a superstar coming soon.
Chris, I think there's a conspiracy against the Heat because I don't know why NBA TV didn't put that marathon on before LeBron made this decision because I think he could have been convinced to play with some current Heat players if he just had those memories flooding through his head.
Like July, like if they did that like June 28th,
right?
That he would have been a Heat player.
Like, why do it now? I tweeted a bunch of stuff. You can check it out at 5 Reasons Sports about that era, some of my memories from it. And they're great memories. And one of the things that I said in there was that it was a blessing, but it's also a curse because when you start to watch some of those games, you realize that's never going to happen again. And not just in this city, but in virtually any city in the country. Lightning does not strike twice. And what I said, and I can tell you, Dwayne Wade liked this tweet, so clearly he agrees with this, Chris, that there may have been better teams in the past 30 years. And you can certainly make an argument for maybe the Shaq Kobe Lakers, certainly the Jordan Bulls, if you're just going to say 30 years.
The modern-day Golden State Warriors.
And the modern-day Golden State Warriors with Durant and Curry. You can make a case for those 3 teams. Don't give me the Celtics, of the 08 Celtics. That didn't last long enough.
I think you're going to say like the 86 Celtics or something.
No, I'm talking about last 30 years. But,
okay.
But here's the thing. No matter what you think of them as a basketball team, the Miami Heat are sort of the cultural touchstone of the NBA from the past 30 years. What that team did, and under that pressure, and the way that they changed the way that we look at basketball, and the way that they did it during the social media Twitter era, is not going to happen again. It's just not going to happen again, Chris. And that's really difficult because the people who experienced it most directly were Heat fans. And so now, and this is why I want to do this episode today, now you have Heat fans that are not going to be satisfied with anything, because nothing is going to compare to that unless you go 30-11 in the second half. Like, that'll sort of do it until Heat fans realize that really wasn't such a good thing for the franchise, like you were realizing. But that's the problem here, and I think that's why I want to inject just a little bit of optimism today. Some, and you're going to shoot it all down, but I'm going to try.
I agree with what you're saying, which is that there is an unreasonable expectation that comes with this. But you know what? I think that's actually being unfair to the fan base a little bit, because I do think that most fans have kind of understood that, okay, that's gone now, and it's not going to be easily replicable. Like, but you can hope that, and certainly you can have an expectation that, like, Pat Riley is going to do something, right? And I think that's where some of the disappointment comes, is that, well, normally Pat Riley just, waves a magic wand and fixes it, and that hasn't happened yet. But I don't think that there's anyone expecting that, you can manufacture the big three easily. Like, it's among the most impossible roster reconstructions in the history of sports. And so I don't think people are expecting that. I just think that, in particular, this team, it becomes something of a sobering reality when, they get 3 minutes on the Zach Lowe podcast, and that represents your national media diet on the Heat for a full month. Like, in the middle of free agency, when you have Pat Riley as your executive, like, they're not any kind of interesting on a national basis, and they don't have any superstars. So, like, it's not just a drop, it's a significant drop from where you were, and I can understand how some Heat fans are either growing impatient with that or apathetic or whatever it is they end up feeling as a result of that.
I get all of that, but I also see where Pat Riley is coming from on this, and obviously we've been critical of Pat Riley and particularly what happened last summer, but there is a Big Three Twitter, and then there's a previous Heat fan Twitter. There are two different things, and I counter it every day, and the Big Three Twitter, and I'm not talking about the Big Three with Amari Stoudemire and Rashard Lewis on the court now. I'm talking about the Big Three as we know it with the Heat. The reality is that those fans have a certain expectation. And you're right, they may not expect him to pull that off again, but they expect him to get Kawhi. They expect him to get Gordon Hayward. And they don't really understand how challenging that is, or what it was like prior to the Big Three. Don't even go that far back. Just go to like 2009, right, where Dwayne Wade was playing at an ungodly level and had no help. That's the reality of the NBA. That's how it usually works. How it worked during the Big Three is not how it works. And the news here is the clues, because this is what Heat fans do. They look for clues, right? Like, they are the most social media savvy of all the sports fans down here. That's not close, by the way. It's Heat Twitter is a totally different entity than Dolphins Twitter, and it is, they're into everything. And they did a repost of this James Johnson IG post, Instagram for those over 30. And essentially, it's a photo of James Johnson working out with Wayne Ellington, who is the nicest guy in the world, but as you mentioned, looks menacing in the photo. I'm not sure why. Tyler Johnson.
I'm still not convinced that's Wayne Ellington.
I as I look at it, I'm not sure either, because again, he is the nicest guy in the world, but he doesn't look like him. But the other two guys that they've got on there are Dwayne Wade and Udonis Haslem, and they've been working out together. People are waiting on Dwayne. That's really the only news that's left. And so I don't know what Dwayne's going to do. Clearly, he has said that it's going to be one of two things at this point, which is retirement or playing. He's doing a lot of working out for a guy who's retiring. So it looks to me like he's playing. I had heard he wanted a little bit more money out of this situation. I'm not really sure how they do that. And if they want to clear out a two guard, he's working with one of those two guards in that picture, Tyler Johnson. So
another in Wayne Ellington, if that's Wayne Ellington,
right? And Wayne Ellington is not going anywhere because they just signed him. So so I don't know what Dwayne's going to do. But so let's try to put that aside for a second. The Heat are sort of starved for news at this stage, as we talk about. And that's why even their sort of social media gaffe this week, which was very unlike them, they don't make mistakes like this. And actually, Michael McCullough, who came out and apologized for it because they don't make mistakes like this, where they're hyped to schedule a release for 3 days, okay, on Twitter, which is worse than the hype that I do on 5 Reasons Sports, where I'm basically hyping Smart Tweets, Smart Your Territory, coming out with their first episode for the last 3 weeks. Like, this was two people who follow the Heat closely. They're starved for news. A schedule release is not going to do it. So I understand why Heat fans are frustrated. I'm going to try today, not knowing what Dwayne's going to do, to give you 5 reasons why I think this is better than Heat fans perceive it to be. This is the longest open we've ever done for an episode because I'm putting it off. but I want to get to these 5 things. So you ready to shoot all these down?
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy, ready to be the cynic here.
Okay, all right. So here is the first one. Dion Waiters and Goran Dragic. I have not been... No, here's the thing on this. I have not been the biggest proponent of the Waiters contract. We've discussed that. But you can't deny this. Those 2 guys had chemistry. Whether you look at it from the eye test or you look at it from the numbers. Goran Dragic and Dion Waiters, I would not think that their games would fit together, because both of them are kind of combo guards. Like, Dion is a guy who needs the ball in his hands a lot for a 2. Goran is a guy also who plays a lot off the ball at times, but he's not a traditional point guard. But that worked. They had a chemistry. We called it 7-11. That was the catalyst behind the 30-11 run in the second half of that season. And that 30-11 even comes with Dion missing time in the last 2 weeks because of the ankle injury, where I think they lost 4 games. So they only lost 7, from what I recall, in the second half of the season, with Dragic and Waiters playing together. And so I'm going to – look, I don't know if Dion's going to be ready for camp. I don't know what kind of shape he's going to be in when he comes back for camp. I don't know what the role is going to be, particularly if Dwayne comes back, because I don't think Dwayne and Dion can play well together. I think that's going to be a bit of a mess. But I will say that Goran Dragic and Dion Waiters had something that you want your backcourt partners to have, which is they clearly had trust in each other. And so if Dion can get right, I don't see why they couldn't recapture some of that. And maybe I'll have to back off of my stance that the Waiters contract for 4 years was not a good deal. Shoot it down.
I'll briefly be positive before I do that. I agree with you on Dragic and Waiters. They played 24 games together in that 40-11 period between Dragic being out and Waiters being out. And the Heat were 21-3 when those 2 guys were together in 24 games. They were plus 96. So I understand where you're coming from in terms of those 2 guys working together, but I just, obviously, they weren't healthy last year. Hassan White's had a setback. James Johnson had a setback. Dion Waiters missed the whole season or close to it. And so maybe it's unfair to totally write off 30-11, but at a certain point, we have to acknowledge that was a complete and utter fluke. And it was fun for when it happened. It was an enjoyable experience for the fans. I'll be honest, I didn't really get on board until, I would say, after they beat Golden State, which I think was a decent way into it, because my thought is at the time that they were 11-30, that I think they were only a game worse or a game better than Brooklyn in the standings, and if they carry on that trajectory and finish 22-60, they would have had a top 3 pick when they don't look to have any for the foreseeable future. And I thought, if there's a year that you're going to tank and try and get a top 3 pick that you need to rebuild your franchise in the aftermath of LeBron and Chris Bosh no longer being part of your setup, then that was the year to do it. That was the year to really go for the bottom of the league, and they did, and they won a bunch of games, and now here we are after those guys got rewarded for it. So, but my thinking going forward is, as much as there are no doubt cogent basketball reasons why it did work, I don't think that it's replicable going forward. These players are, in the end, journeyman players, and there's only so much that you can try and talk yourself into before you just realize it was a fluke.
Okay, and I understand that because, we have seen teams that gel in a certain way and that it does not come back the next season. But I go back to a point that you've made in there, which is that we never really saw it healthy last year.
Mm-hmm.
And
but,
Dion.
But here's the thing, Ethan.
Yep.
Like, for me, the odds are we're never going to see it healthy because the odds are that someone is going to get hurt. Like, you don't You don't get to say, oh, but if we were just healthy. Like, there's always injuries. There's always someone that's either not going to be 100% or, like Hassan Whiteside did bump knees with Nikola Vucevic and the rest of his season takes on a totally different trajectory. Like, the ideal world in which you are totally healthy, for the most part, doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, but I think for a team like this, losing one piece when the chemistry is as fragile as it was, because so much of what they built during 30 and 11 was that sort of feeling of camaraderie and the pieces fitting well together. And again, I go back to Dragic and Waiters, because that really is, we can talk about James Johnson and what he did the second half of that season, and some of the other guys there, but it was their backcourt, Chris. I mean, that's what pushed them during those 3 months. It was Dion making those kind of shots, and it was Goran playing at an all-star level. And so when Dion was not right from the start of the season, and again, I was not a proponent of that contract, okay? So because for something you're saying, because I didn't believe a 2-month sample size or a 3-month sample size, when you had the rest of his career to look at, was enough to justify giving 4 years to somebody who wasn't getting more than a 1 or 2 year offer from anywhere else. But I am going to give them some benefit of the doubt here, because Dion was not right at the start of last season. It was obvious. His shooting percentage was horrific. I don't think it was just him totally reverting to the mean, so to speak. I just think he was hurt. And so I want to see him healthy, and I want to see him in shape. And to me, that's the other thing. Like, is he going to get in the kind of shape again that he needs to get into? When at the time he got into that shape, he was on a 1-year, $2.7 million contract and not a 4-year, 44 or whatever it is. To me, that's one of the issues here, because is Dion going to be as hungry as he was? And I don't mean the hungry that got him out of shape. I mean the hungry on the basketball floor. And so I would just want to see it. I want to see him and Goran together. And so we'll move on to part 2 here. But that gives me a little confidence that they may be able to push forward with their backcourt. We'll get back to the Boundless Optimism here in a second, but want to introduce you first to another of our great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is Design Gnome. You can find them at designgnomeinc.com. They are a printing company. They offer on-time delivery, exceptional quality, competitive pricing, and no minimums. They specialize in high-quality screen printing, digital printing, embroidery, large format printing, vinyl graphic, promotional items, and much, much more. And I can speak to this personally because they've been the ones printing up the 4x6 cards that have appeared on your windshield while you are watching Brock Osweiler play in training camp for the Miami Dolphins. So it's Design Gnome. They print everything. Their phone number is 786-471-2580. Again, it's 786-471-2580. DesignGnomeInc.com. Let's move on to number 2. This is another one where I think I've been sort of pigeonholed, in a way that I don't think is accurate with my actual position, which is Hassan White's.
You mean the way that you've pigeonholed me as the cynic on this podcast?
No, that's accurate. But but I've been pigeonholed as some kind of Whiteside basher, which to me is amusing because I wrote a column for a newspaper I won't name, but I wrote a column for a local newspaper that they should re-sign Hassan Whiteside when they maxed him out. And I raised all the concerns that have since come to pass, but I said he's an asset that you should try to keep, and other teams were going to offer in the max. So I've not been against Hassan from the beginning. I thought he was a great story, the way he came up and the way he worked and put himself in the position that he did. We've just obviously seen some limitations and some issues here, particularly over the past year, okay? But again, here's the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was hurt. And I know he was hurt to a certain degree because I know, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, that the brace was an issue. So let's just say he stays healthy. And let's say that he doesn't bump knees again, which we don't know if that's going to happen. And let's say that he will play through some pain, which again, we don't know if that's going to happen. The reality is his per minute numbers, as you and I have talked about, were exactly the same last year that they were the year before. And in some categories, they were actually slightly better. So even if he didn't have the same athleticism last year that he had in past years, he was still productive based on the way that we measure that, right? Not saying it always looked good, but based on the way that we measure that, he was still productive in the minutes that he actually played. So is it totally beyond the realm of possibility, Chris, that he can have a better season next season than he had last season?
No, it's not out of the realm of possibility. So again, if he gets back to his athletic peak, which I think we can now say he was not at last season, and it's actually one of the things that frustrates me a little bit about the franchise is obviously they want everyone to be Udonis Haslem and play through pain, but first off, Udonis Haslem kind of wrecked his career by playing through pain. But second, you can't expect someone to play through pain and then when at least an aspect of their game is predicated on athleticism, expect them to be at their best and then get angry at them when they're not at their best. Like, Hassan's game is predicated, at least in part, on his athleticism. And so when he doesn't have it, it's not going to look the same than when he has his full and peak athleticism and when he's unencumbered by a knee brace. Like, it is going to look different. The one thing for me, and we talked about this on a previous podcast, was just how much he's wrecked his value going forward by virtue of the fact that he was so dreadful in the postseason, and that I don't know how that gets rectified in the space of a year. I don't think the league is all of a sudden going to bend to where Hassan Whiteside can survive in a playoff series. And that for me is the ultimate concern is, yes, in terms of winning regular season games, him being healthy, him being right helps. But in terms of two things, number one, him being good in the playoffs, which obviously he wasn't last year, but secondarily, the fact that he wasn't pleased with not closing games. And part of that is at least in part because of the matchups, and Erik Spoelstra likes to play Kelly Olynyk better and didn't want to put two bigs on the floor. Maybe he wants to put Bam Adebayo in those situations. Like, because of the fact that Hassan Whiteside is a struggle in crunch time and is a struggle in the postseason, there's just going to be a ceiling on, even at peak athleticism, what he can really offer to the Heat.
Here's what I'm going to bet on here if I'm going to look for some hope. I'm going to bet on Spoelstra.
Okay.
In this way. Erik has put more time into Hassan than any other player he's ever coached. That was the case 2 years ago. Okay. It certainly is the case now. And that's coming from the coach himself. Okay. So I know that. And I'm just thinking that if Erik had a whole offseason to come to terms with the fact that I'm going to be coaching Hassan again. Okay. Whatever happened during the regular season, particularly whatever happened during the playoffs, Hassan's comments about BS and all the rest of that, we're not trading Hassan now. Maybe we'll trade Hassan in the future, but Hassan is going to be a member of the Miami Heat to start the 2018-19 season. And unless something goes absolutely crazy, he's probably going to be the starting center in the season opener. Like, I don't see him starting Bam or Olynyk ahead of him at the very beginning because he'll lose him for the entire year, right? So to me, Hassan's going to be the starter initially. And I just think that Erik is, and Erik, look, if you talk to players, they'll talk about how he can be stubborn at times, but at other times he's very resourceful. And I just think that with an offseason to think about it, I think Erik will come up with some kind of a plan to reach Hassan better than he reached him last year. Again, I'm not blaming Spoelstra for that, but I'm just saying clearly it didn't work. So I'm going to give him some benefit of the doubt here that whatever conversations they've had behind the scenes, and look, I don't believe everything they say about these kind of conversations because I've been through this with them for 20 years. I mean, there are times we've told conversations happen and they don't happen. But I am confident that Erik is going to come up with something to make Hassan feel more valued. Because to me, that's really what this is about. It's about making Hassan feel like they need his contributions. And that disappeared as the season went on last year. And then when it got to the playoffs, it was like, yeah, we don't need you at all. Like, in fact, not only do we not need you at all, we need you off the floor to have a chance. And I just think that Erik has to reframe that narrative and that conversation with Hassan. And I just think he's smart enough to figure out some way to do that. What you're talking about the way the game has changed, that's all valid, and that's not going to get any better. As far as his athleticism, maybe it gets a little better as the knee heals and if he doesn't injure it again. But I'm going to put a little bit of a bet here on Erik to say maybe they can get a little bit more out of Hassan, certainly than they did in the playoffs last year.
Carry on with the conversation in just a moment, but first I want to tell you about one of our partners here at the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We love telling you about the people that we do business with because we believe in them and we want you to use them for your business. And one of them is Miss-Inc.com. That's INK.com. It is Miami social media marketing services and content writing services as well. So Misty Buck does a terrific job with this website. She's been helping us with Twitter, with Instagram, with the various social media platforms so that we can grow our business and we can grow our following and so that we can get bigger. So you want to check her out at Miss-Inc. That's Miss, M-I-S-S, -INK.com.
All right, let's move on to part 3 here. The other reasons to be optimistic. I don't know how well we're doing here, but I'm trying. And number 3 is the young guys. And there are 3 that they did not trade. And there were a lot of Heat fans who did not want them to trade these 3 guys. But it's Bam Adebayo, it's Justice Winslow, and it's Josh Richardson. And for me, it's about maximizing what they do well. And what we saw from Josh Richardson in December is something that if they can replicate that player, the way that he played in December, shooting plus 50% from the field, averaging 18, while playing the great defense that we've come to know him for, like that is a really good second or third option on a very good team. And I think it's still in him to do that. It fell off a little bit when Dwayne came back. I felt like he took a step back to sort of accommodate Dwayne. I also felt like the offense didn't really involve him quite as much. Like he was an afterthought in the Philadelphia series. Chris, we didn't even talk about him much, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, he was their best player for most of the season, and it was like, oh, yeah, Josh had 7 tonight. Okay. And that needs to change. Not good enough for a player of his quality, actually, because he's a quality NBA player at this stage. So if he can find what he found in December and they can bring that out of him consistently, then they're fine there. Now, the thing with Josh is he's still playing out of position, and they didn't solve that problem. Like, Riley says he's a 2. When Dwayne signs, or if Dwayne signs, they're going to have 5 other 2s.
I think that stuff's overrated. Like, I just when you say 2, like, you mean he's not getting the same looks on offense? Like, I just think like the league is now it's wings, point guards, and bigs. Like he's a wing, whether it's the 2 or the 3, or hell in super smart lineups even the 4. Like, is it about who he's guarding, or is it about like the looks that he gets on offense?
Well, I don't know that it's about who he's guarding, because we've seen that Josh can guard up, and so I think he's fine there. I think it's on the other end and who's guarding him sometimes, because sometimes it's a guy who's 6'7", 6'8", who's just bigger physically than him. And so I think that is a bit of a problem at times. Like I would rather have him at the 2 working against some 6'4" guys more consistently than working at the 3. And the other thing for the Heat is it just makes them small across the board. Like it's one thing to say your wings and your point guards and your bigs. Okay, the Heat are big with their bigs, right? Like they have, good-sized bigs. Their point guards, not especially tall. And their wings are all 6'3", 6'4". I mean, except for Josh, who's 6'6", and he's kind of a lanky 6'6". So I do think it matters in that regard. I see what you're saying. I would rather he started at the 2. Clearly, that's not going to happen. But I do think that they can replicate a lot of what they got from him. The other 2 guys, Bam Adebayo, let's start with him before we get to Justice. He was uneven during Summer League, but you also see what they like. And I do think that they can build on that this year. The biggest impediment to him is that his best pairing was with Kelly Olynyk. If you look at the numbers, him with Olynyk, they were, I think, a plus 11 per 100 possessions. And I just don't know how they get to that very often if they're trying to sort of, do the right side reclamation project this year. So I think that's the biggest impediment for Bam. And for Justice, it's sort of replicating the energy and the passion he played with in the playoffs. Because I think if he can do that consistently, and he can shoot mid-30s from 3, which is what he did last year, then I think he can be more than maybe we thought a year ago.
For me, in terms of Justice Winslow, and I actually was hugely enthused about his playoff performance, but again, it's another one of these that you do in the postmortem. You go back and look at his numbers. Like, he shot better from 3 than he did from 2. And in that series, he shot 36.8% from 3 and 35.7% from the field. And again, it's just one of those things where you leave a playoff series feeling enthused about a guy who averaged 10 points a game on 35.7% shooting. And it's like, well, what am I so excited about? And I do believe that Justice Winslow is a good player. He might be among the Heat's 3 best playoff players, because I really like, even disregarding the numbers, I thought he had a good playoff series. I thought when you're putting together any combination of the Heat's best 5 players to deploy in that playoff series, it had to include Justice Winslow. He was a threat, and I thought he played in that playoff series very well. But again, for me, the problem is that I just think that he's a role player. And I don't see a way that you get around the fact that, for the most part, I think these guys are role players to supersized role players. Like, I don't think you're getting into... I don't think you can get to a place where Josh Richardson is a 18-point-a-game scorer on a good team. Like, I think last year he averaged 13.9, and the year before he averaged 10 points a game. Like, again, this isn't a guy that, for the most part, is going to be what I believe to be an anchor piece. These are good role players that, at least at the moment for Josh Richardson, is value for money. Bam Adebayo is definitely a value for money. But, again, for me, his ceiling is Clint Capella, which, is a valuable player. He got a lot of money this offseason, and I think is a key part of what the Rockets do, but is not someone that you're necessarily building your offense around. And I think that's a real distinction. And so, in the end, I just don't know that you can really anticipate a step for Josh Richardson entering his fourth season. He'll be 25 at the start of the season, which is still young, but obviously it's not the same as drafting a 19-year-old, and when he's entering year 4, he's 22. There is a significant difference in drafting a college freshman versus drafting a college senior, which is why they go earlier in the draft. And so I do think that the Heat have some promise in these young areas, but I just don't see the ceiling that would really give you that sense of optimism.
To me, it's about giving them the opportunities to show what their ceiling is. And that has been my whole issue with some of these contracts that they've given out, because I do think they've progress stopped some of these players by signing slightly above average players to these long-term deals that they thought they could flip. And that's going to be the task for Erik Spoelstra this year, is prioritizing the right guys while trying to win. And that's always a tough task. And that's why I want to get to him in number 4 here. I'm going to combine two things for you, Chris, in terms of reasons to be somewhat optimistic. And that's Spoelstra and its continuity. And those things go together. Because, as I said before, I think if you give Erik enough time to figure out how to solve the Whiteside issue, I also think giving him enough time to figure out how to make this roster work will pay dividends for the Heat, because he's known who his guys were going to be for a long time, right? Like, it was not likely that the Heat were going to be able to make any major move this offseason, or even that they were able to clear significant salary. And if you believe the reports that they weren't even offering any of their young guys, then Erik Spoelstra went into this offseason knowing that really the only change in his life was going to be changing diapers. Like, I mean, he knew right? I mean, he knows what his team is. It's just a question of Waiters getting healthy and Whiteside getting healthy and Johnson, James Johnson getting healthy, and then putting the pieces together. And I do think giving him an offseason to figure that out could help them get off to a really good start. And I've been through this with the Heat before. I remember covering a couple of those late 90s teams that Riley coached. And I remember one of those years, they just got off to a blazing start before they had some injuries. I mean, they looked great. And it's because Hardaway and Mourning and PJ and Dan Marley and Vashawn Leonard and that group had been together for a period of time. And we saw that with Toronto a couple of times over the past couple of years, that just having the same core allows you to get off to a fast start. And I think this team absolutely needs to get off to a fast start. I'm going to get to the East here in a second, but there's a lot of, Boston obviously is bringing back 2 very talented players. You'd rather have that problem, right, than having a problem of not enough continuity. But it is going to take a little bit of time for them to sort of figure it out. And meanwhile, the Heat are going in with exactly the same team, with adding Dion Waiters back and, again, adding maybe a healthier Hassan. And so I do think that there are positives to that, and I do put a lot of trust in Erik to kind of figure that out.
And again, I think he gets all the credit for how 2017 worked and all the combinations that worked out. And we talked earlier about Dragic and Waiters and some. And you said that shouldn't really work on paper, but it did. And I think a huge amount of that credit goes to Erik Spoelstra. But again, I think he's working with a talent base that. Do you really believe that a coach can single-handedly, do something with, a lack of talent on a consistent basis? Like, I really think in another coach's hands, this is like even more, negative and sort of dour going into a season. I think if, this was the Orlando Magic's roster, you'd be like, that team's going 28 games. And because it's the Heat, because it's Erik Spoelstra, because he's figured out a way to make these things work, I think that's the reason why we look at them as a playoff team, right? Like, they're going to be, it might be bottom half of the conference, but they're going to be a playoff team. I think Erik Spoelstra, particularly in the aftermath of LeBron leaving, and maybe after 2014-15, because that didn't really work, I think Erik Spoelstra over the course of his career has been a perennial overachiever. And Obviously maybe the first year, the Big Three era, it didn't work, and I think they obviously committed to playing defense above offense in anything else. I do think that in the overall, though, he has been an overachiever, and why obviously we frankly on this podcast are confused about why Erik Spoelstra gets any criticism. But again, you're a team that's a little bit above 500. The coach is going to get some of that shrapnel, but I think just the fact that people expect them to be in the playoffs is because of Erik Spoelstra. Like, I think even if this team doesn't make any improvement and they win 44 games and go out in the first round of the playoffs again, that, for me, is still an incredible coaching job by Erik Spoelstra, because this is not a talent base of a team that should be routinely making the playoffs.
Well, I don't think they're a 28-win roster if they're Orlando. I do agree with what you're saying. That they don't have.
But why though? They have like a lot of the similar pieces that Orlando does. Just because they play in a uniform that you see every night and you've seen them win, like if you saw these names on a sheet for the Orlando Magic, you'd think they're going to win 28 games.
Yeah, but there's more depth on this roster than Orlando. I mean, look, Chris, they don't have a top 30 player, right? Are we in agreement on that?
Yes.
They don't have okay. So that means they don't have someone number one in the other team.
Okay, so can we go through the Orlando Magic team real quick just for giggles? Okay, so point guard DJ Augustine. Okay, so that's
Dragic is better,
right?
Much.
Backup Jerian Grant, Evan Fournier at shooting guard. For me, about the same. Small forward.
Well, the Heat have 5 of those, so yeah,
they have 5 Evan Fourniers. And then the Magic have like 5 centers. And then they have Jonathan Simmons, Terrence Ross, Aaron Gordon, Jonathan Isaac, Nikola Vucevic, and Mo Bamba.
No. Well, we don't know what Mo Bamba is yet, but no, Chris, the Heat roster is better than that. It's
not by much. Not by much.
It's better than that, but I'm still going to give Spoelstra enormous credit. And at the same time, because look, they don't have a top 30 player. I mean, Goran snuck into the All-Star game as the 15th guy in the East, which wouldn't
Aaron Gordon be the best player on the Heat?
Not consistently, no. I mean, you feel like he's taken that? I don't know what Aaron Gordon is yet.
I think he's surrounded by a dreadful team, but he averaged 17.5 points a game last year on. Not terribly efficiently, 43.4% from the field, and
I mean, you don't think Josh
Richardson
Richardson would do that in Orlando? I do. I mean, I
guess.
I mean, Goran Dragic would do better than that in Orlando. Like, no, I don't think Aaron Gordon would be the best player in the Heat. But the reality is, while the Heat may not have a top 30 player, they have a whole lot of players between 40 and 100, I think, or at least 40 and 120, a lot more of those players than Orlando does. So I don't want to take anything away from Erik. I agree with you, everything you're talking about with Erik. I do believe he's overachieved in most seasons. I think if you look back to the LeBron, the year after LeBron, I mean, he played like 9 guys that year who were not in the league the next year. I mean, guys like Henry Walker, remember that? Like, I mean, those guys were getting not just significant minutes; they were getting crunch time minutes on that team. I mean, Justin Hamilton was getting significant minutes on that team during stretches. So, I do think he's been. Look, again, I think Heat fans are too hard on him. I don't think, honestly, those are the most passionate Heat fans. I think they're kind of, the ones, again, just sort of spraying buckshot at everybody when they're not happy. And Erik gets a lot of that. But to me, he's done a great job here. But I'm going to give him, I don't know that he can make this a 50-win roster. But I do think he can get this. If he got other rosters into the mid to high 40s, I think he can get this roster into the mid to high 40s. But let's go through this real quick, because the Heat did hype the hell out of this week. I know, accidentally. But we talk about trying to get off to a fast start, and I don't usually play the schedule game, Chris.
Sure.
But let's look at the schedule.
Come on. We're going to do this for the NBA?
Well,
come on.
I'm just going to give you some names. Your Orlando Magic, led by Aaron Gordon. First game of the season. A Washington team that we don't really know what they are, right?
Didn't the Heat open with Orlando last year, right? And it was like a really close game?
I feel like they always open with Orlando.
They lost to Orlando in the opening day of the season
Well, they lost a couple games to Orlando last year, yes. But Washington, second game of the season. We don't know what they are. Charlotte, third game. Knicks, fourth game. Then a Portland at home on a Saturday night. Blazers were third in the West, but they didn't make any significant additions. The Kings, the Hornets, the Hawks, the Pistons.
Schedule. Holy.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah. So if you have continuity, you've got an excellent coach, you get some guys coming back from injury, You get a little bit of enthusiasm. You've got this us against the world because everybody feels about us like Chris Whittingham does. I mean, I could see a 6-2 start with that schedule, Chris.
It's just like you're routinely, you just scroll up and down the schedule. There's always a home Atlanta, home Orlando. You're going to eat up on the Eastern Conference. And this actually, for me, is the most convincing argument of the arguments you made so far, is that conference is bad, man. And you look at, I mean, I guess, okay, so the teams that you wouldn't want to play, right? Toronto, Boston, Philly, and then I think Indiana's earned their way into that conversation based off what they did in the postseason and how they closed the regular season. And then I think Milwaukee is going to be significantly improved under Bud. So I do think that there are 5 teams that you really wouldn't want to see. Other than that, if you're, away to the Cleveland Cavaliers, like, all right, cool. Like, we're going to expect a win tonight. Like, you're going to expect a win against Cleveland, Detroit, Charlotte, Knicks, Nets, Bulls, Magic, Hawks. And you're going to play those teams, like 20 times over the course of a season? Like, so you're going to feel like you're going to go into games regularly that you can win. And then if you can put together enough wins, you might even climb up from where you were last year at 6 and get to 5 or 4 and be kind of that best of the rest for me behind Toronto, Boston, Philly. And then you're in there with Indiana and Milwaukee.
This was going to be reason number 5, and I'm with you on this. The Eastern Conference pretty much sucks at the bottom, Chris. And that's just the reality of this. And again, you talk about those top 3 teams and then kind of where Indiana and Milwaukee fit somewhere there in the middle. But there are 5 teams that are not really trying this year in the East. I mean, Atlanta is not trying. The Knicks aren't going to get Porzingis back until at least halfway through the season. Your Magic are terrible. So, again, the continuity, some guys coming back from injury, and this schedule that I think they're going to fatten up on. Like, if they to me, a lot of this is about narrative, Chris. Okay?
No, but okay, can I say this before we go on? Like, the Heat lose a lot of these games.
They
right?
do.
They lose a lot of the games to the teams they should beat.
That's correct. But if they can fix that, and we'll have to see if that actually happens, and obviously one little thing goes wrong with this team and they can lose to a team like that. I get it. But when you look at the schedule, you look at the continuity, you look at these guys knowing each other already, knowing what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. Sort of, if Dion comes back, maybe he's the guy down the stretch. Maybe it's Dwayne if Dwayne comes back. But having that together, having a soft schedule at the beginning of the season, if you got off to, again, I said 6-2, but if you got off to a 10-5 start, which is very possible with this schedule, your narrative changes, your confidence changes. And we saw what this team does with confidence, because they got that in the second half of the season in 2016-17, and they rolled to 30-11, even with Dion missing the last couple of weeks of the season. So as I go through the 5 arguments here, I know I haven't convinced you completely. Honestly, I have not convinced myself, okay? Because I think if they don't make a major change, it's probably a 42 or 43 win team that probably finishes 6th in the Eastern Conference. Like, that's where I would put them. But of the 5 arguments I made, which is most convincing to you?
I would say just the overall weakness of the schedule, and that you're going to beat some teams. Like, you're going to expect to beat some teams on any given night, and that's actually the thing about the 30-11 run, is that even when they were doing it, again, because they were an 11-30 team, you never really went into any game thinking, well, they're definitely going to win this. And because they set that expectation, we went into last season thinking they were going to be that way, and then they overachieved in some games, but then, they lose to Orlando, they would lose to Brooklyn, and you would be like, well, what the hell? And I don't think this team can take anyone for granted, but let's take some teams for granted, because there are going to be some terrible basketball teams in the Eastern Conference this year, and so you're going to have the opportunity to win some games that, again, if you're in the Western Conference with this team, it misses the playoffs by 4 games, in my opinion. But you're in the East, and so you're going to be able to make the playoffs, and I don't know if that helps with optimism, though, because you're going to kind of be left in the same position, which is a first-round series against a team you probably can't beat. And so I don't even if you do beef up on the schedule a little bit, unless it gets you to 3 to where you avoid some of these teams, and maybe you get to play a Washington in round 1 rather than a Toronto or a Boston or a Philly in round 1. Unless it's that good, I just don't see how it really that dramatically alters the course of the season.
Well, and of course they've lost that one guaranteed win against LeBron in Miami, which they were getting We're getting two of those each year.
You don't think it transfers over to the Lakers? You don't think he's taking? I think he's taking those nights off again.
Well, yeah. Well, he only play. Well, the Lakers only play here once. Cleveland played here twice. So
he'll take it off. He'll take it off.
LeBron was going to sit.
He's not playing that. I'm going to check the schedule right now. It's going to be a back-to-back, and he's not going to play.
That's exactly right. I think
it is the second night of a back-to-back. Yeah, they're in Orlando on the Saturday, and then they're in Miami on the Sunday. And so I can almost assure you that LeBron James will not be playing in that game.
And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope will shoot 5 of 19 from the field. Just calling it right now. All right, that's the end of our podcast. Hopefully, we injected a little bit of optimism for you here. I mean, again, you are really negative for a team that's going to win 43 games, Chris.
What do you mean? I didn't think I was that negative. I find it. I have a sense of apathy about it because I kind of already know the outcome of the season, right? Like unless they. But we
know the outcome of the season generally. Like Golden State's going to win the championship. Like if that's the measure here, Chris.
Sure.
Like, why are we doing
but if
this
you're
all?
But if you're a fan of the Milwaukee Bucks who finished below the Heat in the standings last year, you can say we've got Giannis. We've got Budenholzer. Let's go. We're going to make a jump this year. We've got a guy that we feel like is going to take us somewhere. If you're Indiana, you're not going to win the championship, but you found a superstar in Victor Oladipo last year. Let's go. Let's get this season started. I'm excited to see how if that was a one-season wonder if Oladipo's legit or if someone else can be around him and help him grow. Some of these, they have something, right, where you're not going to win the title, but you've got something that you're going to, look forward to watching this season. What you just laid out for me is that, Hassan Whiteside's going to be healthy and that Dion Waiters is going to be healthy. That doesn't get me enthused, Ethan. It just doesn't.
I can't wait till the Heat beat guys hear this and hear that you said Orlando's roster is better than Miami's.
I didn't say better. Roster. You're going to put words in my mouth. Have
you watched Nick Vucevic defend, Chris? Have you watched this? DJ Augustine, that's what
you see Hassan Whiteside in the postseason?
I'm going to ignore that. All right, we're going to move on to another podcast tomorrow.
I don't think Orlando's better than Miami.
No, I'm going to edit this one.
No, you're most definitely. It's going to get to Heat beat as Chris thinks that Orlando's better than Miami because I know you. That's how you're going to position it. You're going to get everyone mad at me, and I'm just going to have to turn on my Twitter mentions for 2 days.
Tweeting it right now. Richmond Webb on with us tomorrow.
Josh Darrow here, host of the Five Rings podcast, where it's always a Cane Sting on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. What are we about? Pretty easy. I want to tell stories, and I want to share the journey for the players and coaches, past and present, affiliated with the University of Miami. Take Manny Diaz. He grew up in Miami. He grew up going to the Orange Bowl.
It was all those 1980s teams. That's where it all started for me, and just the style of play and really it really took hold when Jimmy Johnson was here and sitting there in the Orange Bowl in '86 when we were whipping Oklahoma and just just speed and then violence. You know what I mean? We're not only Nebraska. It was a changing of college football.
It's those kind of memories we want to share with you. Listen, subscribe, rate, review. We appreciate the support. The 5 Rings podcast, where it's always a Cane Sting, and we're always a part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network.